first speakers today are two people who did shift in thinking, amongst other things, to make a dream become reality. I'm really looking forward to this. I've seen clips of them, and I'm dying to hear their story. Please welcome on stage Todd Reichert and Cameron Robertson. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We have been so excited and looking forward to this talk. As you can see, for almost a year and a half, by the Norwegian flag up in the corner of that photo. We didn't just Photoshop that in last night. That was in the soccer field when we were doing this record flight. So I'm Todd. This is Cameron. As you can see, this is us here in this photo. And we build flying bicycles. Cameron and I have been working together for almost 9 years now on a variety of unusually awesome projects. Everything we work on runs entirely on human power. So to put that in context, that's a human produces a tiny amount of power. It's effectively the equivalent of a motor about this big, something that you can fit in the palm of your hand. But on this tiny, tiny amount of power, we're able to take bicycles at over highway speeds, and we're able to achieve human flight. At the heart of all this, it's about doing more with less, using the strength of our mind and body to make the impossible possible. So for us, it's really the most impossible challenges that are the most exciting because they force you to think differently. They force you to think in some new and creative way. If you're going to call something impossible, it always depends on the context or the framework. So attacking these problems is about attacking the framework itself, about reinventing the framework. So Cameron and I got our start in 2006 working on the Human-Powered Ornithopter project while we were students at the University of Toronto. And the goal of this project was to achieve an ancient aeronautical dream. It was to fly like a bird under our own strength. So no engines, no propellers, just flapping our wings. And this is a dream that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, from the Greek mythology of Icarus and Daedalus to the sketchbooks of Leonardo da Vinci. But as far as we've advanced in aerospace technology, this was a dream that had yet to be realized. And how we got caught up in all this mess was through our professor, who we call Dr. D. And he's the one on the top left there with the cool sunglasses. And he just had a mind for doing things differently. And he had spent the last 20 years in his research group understanding the mysteries of flapping wing flight, understanding the mysteries of birds. And he had produced the world's first radio-controlled flapping wing aircraft. He had the first hovering flapping wing aircraft, and it even tried full-scale aircraft. So it was in a lab like this, with this sort of mindset and this technology around us, it was hard not to wonder if this original ancient dream of flapping wing flight was actually possible. So we embarked on a journey that would eventually lead to this. Thank you. So, of course, getting there was not all that straightforward. In fact, when we started, the common belief was that this dream was physically impossible. And there's a lot of different reasons why people said it was impossible, but I'm going to show you one of the most compelling arguments. So, this is what we call the Great Flight Diagram. It's amazing. You can take almost everything that flies, insects, birds, bats, even commercial aircraft, and they all fall along the same curve. Now, what this curve says is that as the animal or aircraft gets heavier, it will fly faster. Now, the problem is that as you fly faster, it takes a lot more energy to fly. And eventually there's a limit where you simply can't sustain flight using muscle power. And that limit is around 10 kilograms. And we don't see any birds that are bigger than 10 kilograms. This is where natural species stop. So a human is obviously much bigger than 10 kilograms, ergo a human cannot fly. That's the argument. But if we're going to call something impossible, we need to look at the constraints or the assumptions that went into this argument. And the assumption here is that we're following this curve. But this curve is just a trend line. It's just a very consistent trend line, but we don't have to follow it. And the amazing thing, the key to human-powered flight, is to get off the curve. For its mass, a human-powered aircraft flies incredibly, incredibly slowly, thereby making it possible to fly using just a tiny, tiny amount of power.
The first person to figure out how to get off this curve was a visionary aviation wizard named Paul MacCready from California. And in 1979, he and his team of rebellious tinkerers figured out this airplane, the Gossamer Albatross, and it was able to fly across the English Channel on human power alone. Their insight was to make the wings incredibly light and incredibly large, and this is what allowed it to fly very slowly, and slowly enough for its very meager and weak human engine. It took a huge insight for them to get to this point, but this aircraft was still propeller-driven. What we wanted to do with flapping wings alone was actually quite a step forward in terms of the engineering challenge involved. In 2008, we had done our background research on this project. We had a lot of theoretical education. We had been engineering students for a number of years, and we moved up to this barn in Tottenham, way outside of Toronto in Canada, and we started designing the airplane. When at first we moved in, there was actually a family of raccoons that we shared the barn with, so we had some very messy roommates to clean up after. That was step number one. But as soon as that was done, we realized that we had a lot of theoretical experience, and as we were undertaking this design, we actually had no idea how to build one of these airplanes. We had no hands-on experience, no idea what it took. And so, being students, and in true student fashion, we decided to go on an epic road trip to see every single human-powered aircraft we could in the United States. We went to museums, we went to universities, we were pulling historical artifacts out of storage and holding them with our bare hands and seeing what it was like to make these things real. We were finding the best designers we could on Earth, speaking to the engineers, the experts on these projects. Sometimes it was a little bit tough. They're not the most back and forth interactive people. But by this time, we had seen everything we could. And the best part was, this trip took us only 4 days. There were not that many human-powered aircraft to see. But by the end of it, we had done our homework, we had figured out what it took to make these things real. We had seen the experts, and we had learned from them face to face. And this is kind of the first lesson on all of our projects, which was, in order to work outside of the box, we first had to understand what was inside the box. We couldn't really advance the status quo or the leading edge of the technology without having an incredibly firm grounding in what the base was behind everything that had come before. When we finished our aircraft, the Snowbird, just a few years later, it looked like many of these other aircraft that we had seen. It had a wingspan of 32 meters, but weighed a little bit more than 40 kilograms, substantially less than the pilot. It was built of many of the same materials, and the only real difference was that it had no propeller. This is the biggest change. And though this seems like a simplification, it turns out that it actually makes the whole problem a lot more complicated. It starts with the pilot sitting here in the fuselage, and the pilot, in order to flap the wings, does a leg press. And the leg press pulls down on lines to flap the wings. Now, all we have is the wings for our thrust. And it turns out that you have to design a very long and flexible wing in order to get it to flap and twist and produce thrust the same way that birds do. Our lab had done a lot of research on what's required to make this happen. In order to design the wing this flexible, though, it has to be made of incredibly light materials. The main structure of the wing, the skeleton, if you will, was built of carbon fiber, very similar to the most cutting-edge aerospace technologies. But most of the rest of it, most of what you see is pink styrofoam, white foam for insulating your house, that kind of thing, balsa wood for making maybe model airplanes, and plastic film. These were the kinds of things you would find in a hardware store, not at Boeing or Airbus. However, this wing is so light, it's incredibly fragile, and any part of it could be crushed between your fingers very easily. And in fact, we went home after working on it one night, and we came back the next morning early, and a bird had flown through the wing, and we had a lot of work to do. So there are some things in nature we don't want to emulate, and clumsy birds are not one of them. Having this wing so light meant that it was fragile and also on the edge of failure at all times. So a lot of our diligence, a lot of our research, and a lot of our work went into making sure that it wouldn't break unexpectedly. So we built a number of these skeletal main structures to test and fail and learn how close to the limit we could push the aircraft. And you can see that we used very expensive technology, spared no expense to make sure it was perfect.
So it seems at this point that we sort of more or less had things under control. But with 1 month to go, Cameron and I suffered our first massive failure. And even now, it's hard to know exactly what happened. But we ended up having a falling out in the team, and we effectively had half the team members, or over half the team members, leave. We were left with the 5 people that you see here. And obviously, this was a massive shock to us. Effectively, there didn't seem to be any possible way of finishing the project on the timeline and the budget that we had. But this was, I think, where we really began to realize the power of passionate people. It was actually the 5 people here that were not getting paid on the project that ended up staying. It was the people that were getting paid that left. And the people here just absolutely driven by just a singular vision to make this thing fly. That's the only reason that they were there. And it was incredible. In that last month of construction, forced with this timeline, we were forced to reinvent how we built everything. And we would figure out ways to build it faster and quicker. And we ended up building that aircraft in less time with 5 people than we could have with the entire team. And on a cold October morning, we finished the aircraft, we assembled it for the first time. And this is a very unique aircraft to fly. We're up here at 5 in the morning because we're trying to get out early in the morning before the winds come up, because even the slightest hint of wind would blow this thing away. And we're assembling it here with, again, using the latest technology, farm tractor as our assembly vehicle. And this thing, when it flies, when it takes off, it goes so slowly that you can be running along beside it. And so after many test flights and a few reasonably large crashes, the snowbird succeeded in achieving 19 seconds of sustained flight, which became a historical first and the culmination of this age-old dream. So, as you can see, we have a lot of fun doing this. We had found something that we were really good at that combined a lot of our passions, and we were looking forward to the next challenge. And we found that in the Atlas human-powered helicopter. In 1980, the American Helicopter Society had put up a prize for the first human-powered helicopter to hover for 60 seconds and to reach an altitude of 3 meters. And in 30 years of trying, effectively no one had yet come close. It was a couple years after we had completed the Snowbird, we found out that they had increased the value of the prize to $250,000, and we thought, after you take into account, the cost of building such a machine, this might just be a slightly better than break-even proposition. So we're thinking, this is fantastic. Cameron quit his job, I finished my PhD, and we bit off way more than we could chew. Thank you. So when we started on this project, there had been many teams from around the world that had tried to take this on. And in over 30 years, there had been 3 teams that had managed to lift off the ground. But even then, it was just for a couple of seconds and for a couple of centimeters in height. And the leap that was going to be required to take these aircraft to something that could win this prize was just astronomical. Before we started, there was actually a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal that went through a very detailed proof on exactly why this prize was simply impossible and pretty much a silly endeavor. Fortunately, we hadn't actually read that paper, so we started anyway. But looking at why it's impossible, again, we want to break it down to the assumptions and the constraints that went into this impossibility claim. And if you look at the simple math, if we just look at the most simple equations, they say that if you want this to work, the helicopter has to be absolutely massive. But everyone that had come before had, for some reason, constrained themselves to fly inside a gymnasium, either because that was what was conveniently available or because that's just what looked reasonable as an aircraft. And I think our biggest our biggest key to success in taking on this prize was the ability to free ourselves from the unnecessary constraints. We decided to build the helicopter absolutely as big as necessary. And we just said, later on, we'll figure out where we can actually fly this thing. So we ended up building it twice as big as literally any of the helicopters that had come before. It was probably bigger than the commercial aircraft that many of you have flown in on, and much, much bigger than the small human pilot.
Building an aircraft this large, this lightweight, was a huge challenge, and it was absolutely going to drive all of our design decisions. Every way that we would think about this helicopter would be way different than anything had come before. For example, it was going to be light, it was going to be large, and here this meant that it was going to be extremely flexible and unpredictable and wasn't going to behave like a normal airplane. One of the other ways in which it drove our decision-making process was now again figuring out afterwards where we were going to fly it. And we were lucky to live in another cold country where people want to play football or soccer all year round. And so we called up all of the soccer fields that we could in the Toronto area, and about 12 of them said, "Fly a helicopter inside? No, thank you." 2 of them would speak with us, and this one eventually let us fly there. So we were very close to not being able to fly our helicopter. Now, once we had the certainty that we could fly it somewhere, when we started designing, we had to look to size now from an engineering standpoint. We had to make the entire thing as efficient as anything that had ever been built before. And so the top, you see one of the rotors. This is much more like a wind turbine blade than any helicopter rotor that you've ever seen. We used a computational process that works somewhat similarly to evolution, where we guide the computer through the aerodynamic and structural design, trading off between the two to look for the best efficiency and the lightest weight. And this is how we come up with the perfect helicopter rotor design for this problem. Below, this is a picture of what the airframe, the structure of the helicopter, looks like. It's an incredibly large truss made of carbon fiber, but also actually lots and lots of string. And it was by the use of this string that we were able to make it so light and so stiff. And we were actually able to turn it into an arch-like structure, which is an efficient way of building things all the way back to the Romans. Now, when we started out designing, there were some solutions that we were fortunate that what people had done before was appropriate and was the best solution. We did the whole design study on this, the drive mechanism, and couldn't find anything better than what every helicopter before had done. The way that it works is we start with string wound around the rotor spool here, and then we take that line and we walk it over to the bicycle and we basically tie it around the pedals on this spool here. And then when the pilot starts pedaling, the rotor starts turning as the line gets pulled off, and that's what causes all of the rotors to turn and the helicopter to fly. However, we have only 90 seconds of line because even string is heavy. So at the end of those 90 seconds, you've had enough to win the prize, but you better be on the ground because otherwise the whole thing is coming down very quickly. Now, coming up with this hub was an example. Instead of a design that we could just take from somebody else that worked great, we had to iterate through this design many, many times. Our initial inspiration started with a bicycle wheel. This is a great lightweight structural design. But the first one that we built here just wouldn't work at all. It took only about 20% of the load that we intended. But we were able to iterate and break it and iterate and break it, and each time isolate what went wrong and improve it, and finally we ended up with a solution that took about 1 kilometer of yarn, about a day to make, but weighed only 0.5 kilogram and supported 75 kilograms. So incredibly lightweight engineering. This is an example of a design that we couldn't have foreseen from the beginning and that we had to fail spectacularly to get to work, and this is the control system. At first, we decided to come up with, again, a string and lever-based system that would increase the lift on one side of the helicopter, decrease it on the other side, and that would get our helicopter to drift left or right as we desired. But unfortunately, it would not work at all. At first, if we wanted to go left, we would do this, and it would go right first before coming left. It was not at all how we expected it to work out because the helicopter was so flexible. But in seeing this failure, we envisioned the right solution. We took advantage of this flexibility, and we used lines to tie the bottom of the bicycle to the bottom of each of the helicopter rotors. And so when Todd leans, as you saw in the video, it's actually tilting the entire helicopter and pointing the thrust of the rotors in the direction that we want to go, which turned out to be instantaneous, incredibly intuitive, extremely effective, and we were actually able to chop off 10% of the weight of this entire airplane just like that. However, shedding all of this weight, getting rid of this previous solution was really heartbreaking because we had spent 30% of all of our design time, all of our flight testing, everything coming up with this solution, which we just had to throw away. We had to make 100% certain that we were now on the right track before we just saw these guys off. So with all of this design, all of these neat solutions, we built the helicopter in that same barn in just 3 months with a small team. It was incredibly motivating, fast-paced, ambitious. It was just like working outside when it rained. The rain was on you. But it was fun to live and work together 24 hours a day. However, when it came to flight testing, it was quite a bit more difficult. We had to spend 8 months trying to figure out how to get this whole thing to fly, work every single problem. We were making very small adjustments to the rotor blades, very fine adjustments to the strings that brace the helicopter. And every day, we had to take it out of this trailer here, like a piece of IKEA furniture, put it together, fly it for 8 hours, and then when people wanted to play soccer, we would take it apart, put it in the trailer, maybe it was a snowstorm outside, and then we would go home to fly another day. These were, however, the good days of testing. On the bad days of testing, we would break things. We would break a lot of stuff. On this project, we had a major structural failure more than 25 times in testing. And twice, we were just inches away from success when the whole helicopter came crashing down.
So, in this period of 9 months of crash testing, I think we really began to become familiar with the harsh reality that failure is a necessary part of success. Now, we've all heard this. This is common advice. But when we actually went back to look at our projects and look at our failure, we realized that this is actually very incomplete advice. So we thought, okay, let's draw up a diagram of how we currently understand failure. So this is a plot of the cost of failure, whether the cost of failure is dollars or opportunity cost or hours spent, it doesn't matter. It's the cost of failure as you progress through an innovative project. So early on in the project, the cost of failure is small. This is where we're free to try things out, where we're free to make mistakes. We're free to learn from those mistakes. And for us, this involves just putting a hypothesis to a test or building a prototype, breaking a prototype, or even when we do flight testing, we start by, we're testing low to the ground. If we break something, we can usually fix it within 1 day. So down here on the curve, everything we've heard is true. Don't be afraid to fail early, fail often, all of that stuff. But what happens later on, we sort of have this curve that starts to skyrocket. And we call this area the area of exponentially increasing cost of failure, or the epic fail. Now, for us, the epic failures have not been limited only to the helicopter. We've pretty much crashed almost every vehicle that we've built. And here we treat failure very, very differently, because it's the one thing that you don't check that's going to lead to a crash. So it's all about checklists and checking over and over. So what you saw earlier was our first attempt at the Sikorsky Prize. And this here was our second attempt. So, I don't know about you, but I think it's a good idea to at least have a healthy fear of this kind of failure. It's this kind of failure, these big, massive failures that motivate us to actually test things early. They motivate us to actually test our hypothesis instead of thinking, oh, we have a great idea, I'm sure it'll work, let's just run with it. Really, in any innovative project, as we've now come to realize, somewhere along the line, it's going to not work somewhere. And the key is just to be able to test early enough so that you figure out those problems before it leads to massive failure. So At the end of one of our talks, someone in the audience asked, they said, sure, this is a great story. You crashed, you got up, and you succeeded. But be honest, how hard was it to get back up? And how much did you want to quit? And yeah, honestly, there were many times on this project nearing the end where you just kind of wanted it to be over. It was the exhaustion, the fatigue, the repetition of getting up early mornings, making small adjustments, and at the end of the day, you've really got no further ahead, or you've crashed, or you're repairing things. It's weird. You take on this massive, epic dream, and you don't really envision that there's going to be this period of just painful repetition. But at this point, we knew we were close, and I think there was two things that kept us going. One was that we knew we were close because we really had tested everything along the way. I mean, we hadn't tested everything, obviously, because we had led to a massive crash, but there was almost everything we had tried to test in advance. And the second thing was the team that we had was just absolutely incredible. This was a team that knew how to get back up. And in the end, we didn't get stronger when we failed, we got stronger when we got back up. And every time we crashed, the crash was a bit bigger, and slowly the team began to realize that no matter how big it got, everything was surprisingly recoverable. So on June 13th in 2013, we climbed on board for one more attempt at the Sikorsky Prize.
So what have we been up to since then? Like pretty much everybody, like Peter with his fast cars, we just want to go fast. And so we've been working for the past 2 years on the ADA Speed Bike project. Speed bikes are recumbent bicycles in an aerodynamic shell capable of highway speeds. And in some ways, this is one of our most exciting projects because this is the one that's closest to transferable applications and to really having an impact on the future of travel. So maybe you won't fly your human-powered helicopter to work, but maybe everyone wants to pedal one of these to the office. Even so, this was a field that people are happy to say that things are impossible. And so in 1992, this team, the Cheetah, built a bike that went 110 kilometers per hour. They had 3 engineers with fancy degrees, they had a professional athlete, and they thought that nobody would ever go faster and that they had reached the limit. However, just a few years later, comes along a Bulgarian sculptor and an amateur cyclist, and they take that record from 110 to 133 kilometers an hour in just a few short years. And so now you're getting really fast. But that 25% increase in speed ultimately may not seem like much. But it turns out that because aerodynamic drag, the force that you need to create, goes with the third power of velocity, that 25% increase in speed means that this bicycle is 100% more efficient than the preconceived impossible limit. And George doesn't even have any scientific background. He's a sculptor. He visualizes what the air does by thinking about how a school of fish would part around a rock on the seafloor. And they also iterate and redesign and make small incremental changes, simplifying to make the most efficient vehicle that they possibly can. Now, every year, there's an international community that gets together in Battle Mountain, Nevada, to set the world human-powered speed record. Everyone's trying to get the biggest speeding ticket. This is a unique group of people from Russia, Canada, the UK, France, the Netherlands, where everybody loves bikes. And everybody is trying to push the limit of human capability. Everyone is sharing their knowledge, trying to make a better future, trying to make things go faster and faster to show that there is no limit. And it's working in this community that we've really come to believe that passion drives creativity. It's the intersection of these different kinds of people, these different disciplines and ideas that really creates new ideas. And it's really this culmination where all of the best ideas come together that allows you to assemble as a group perfection much faster than we could possibly ever do on our own. One of the most motivating aspects of this is that there shows no signs of being any limit. Over the past 100 years, this is the human-powered 1-hour distance record. And this blue line is for like a Tour de France bike, like a normal street-legal bicycle. And you can see that humans are not really getting any better. It's pretty much a flat line. However, the green line here is for these unconstrained speed bikes. And you can see that it is going off still like a rocket. So this is what our current bike looks like. And we've taken all of our knowledge and all of the best ideas and put them into this vehicle. We use advanced laminar flow aerodynamics to reduce the drag to the lowest of anything ever before. We use low rolling resistance tires. We even have taken away the windshield because it just holds us back. You can see there's no way for the pilot to see out here. There's actually a teeny little camera up here that goes to a screen in front of your face like the Rolls-Royce ad that we've been seeing. It's an incredibly effective technology. We could never build good windscreens, so we just went to something much clearer for us to steer by. Now, our projection for this bike was 140 kilometers an hour. Last year, we did 127, but this year we've been making sure everything works, there will be no late failures, and we are confident that we can break the record and hopefully smash it. Now, after this project, we have a lot of other things that we're interested in doing. We're interested in taking on small teams and continuing to push the boundaries of the impossible. We have one more human-powered aircraft project, for example, to build an airplane to fly 42 kilometers in just an hour. This is another thing that we've been told is impossible. Some of the same experts that we went to see when we were building the Snowbird have said, not on Earth, but maybe on Mars. So maybe we'll go to Mars. Our whole idea has been to push the limits of the impossible, to inspire people to take on their own challenges and their own projects, and really, in pushing the limits, to prove that impossible is only ever temporary. Thanks very much.
If you just stand here for a second. Sure. That was fantastic. Great.
Thank you.
Really cool. I'm sure we've got questions now. We must have questions. I could feel the questions.
No
in
one
your
wants to
heads.
know what Todd ate for dinner flying the helicopter?
Here's the first one here.
I have one for each of you. You talked about the inspiration, Cameron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get that from? Where did you get your inspiration from? And for Todd, what would you do differently?
Sorry?
What would you do differently? With the, I'm thinking about the project before the bicycle. I'm thinking the helicopter now. What would you? Because you said it was long, and it was well, it was an impact on you.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking you've learned something. What would you do differently?
I can take your inspiration question first. We kind of look for inspiration in different places for different applications. When we're doing design, again, we very much believe that creativity is the intersection of different ideas and kind of the recombining of what we've seen before in novel ways. So as an engineer, I'm always looking everywhere I can, soaking up new ideas. There's a saying that time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. And I find that's absolutely true. It's never a bad idea to learn something new or see something new. In terms of inspiration now for our goals and our life planning, you know, we've talked about how maybe as young children, it wasn't clear who our heroes were. Lately, we've started to really have an interest in people like Elon Musk, people who visualize the future and the betterment of humanity and what it takes to get there. And then, kind of like what we do on an engineering level, they change the structures in society to make that kind of change possible. That's where we seek inspiration on a larger scale.
So, yeah, what would we do differently? I think a lot of things on that project went amazingly right. The team we had pulled together, you know, bringing the team up together to live and work together for a 4-month intense summer. Every project we've taken on has been more difficult than we were ready for. At the start of the project, we thought the project was easier than it was, and we thought we were ready. And every time it was much harder, and we had to grow to reach that level. So, I mean, in taking that on, I wouldn't suggest not taking on a project that you need to grow to reach. That I think it was a very appropriate challenge. I think I think the hardest part was when we got into some of the later flight testing, and I mean, it was an incredibly hard challenge. There's nothing we could have done to avoid the learning that we had to go through, and all the testing and iteration that we had to go through. I think we maybe could have avoided at least one of those big crashes, maybe both. I think once we got to the higher flight testing stage, what we learned afterwards and what we started doing after those crashes was at that late stage when big failures can happen, we would make a checklist, basically brought the entire team down. We said, list every possible thing that can go wrong. Anything you can think of, and let's make sure that we truly have addressed all of this. Because otherwise, you know, we're flying low to the ground, nothing's going wrong, and we think, okay, great, well, let's fly a little bit higher. But you need to think, yeah, what can go wrong? What can go wrong? So I think that's maybe a small change that we would have made that would have avoided maybe a few months of crashing. And I think the other thing was the being prepared for the mindset. When we went into the second crash, I mean, we were close to burnout. I was not in a great state. I mean, I had to lose weight for these flights, so I was fluctuating, losing weight, and then putting it back between flights, and that was very exhausting on the body. So there's things that to focus on, making sure if you're doing something at this level, you need to be in a good mental state, and I think that would be a top priority on a next project, is to ensure you can create the environment to remain in a good mental state.
Question at the front here. We'll just wait for a microphone. And we have another one at the back in a minute. Great. So just wait for the mic at the front.
Okay, I can just start because I have a microphone.
Okay.
I just wonder if you have looked upon research regarding the dinosaurs and the lizards and how they acted in the air. And they were quite big, I guess, a lot more than 10 kilograms.
Yeah. So yeah, my PhD was on understanding the aerodynamics of bird flight and also looking at larger dinosaurs. There's the largest known flying creature is a 15-meter span, and I think almost 100 pounds, so like 40 kilograms. But those large creatures in the past couldn't actually maintain level flight. So they would climb up on a cliff, and they would glide down, and they would flap. So if you just climb on a cliff and glide, you can maybe get to here. Now, if you start flapping, then maybe you can get to here. So they could glide further, but they wouldn't be able to actually just continuously fly around. So that's kind of the difference. Yeah.
Yes, at the front.
I just wondered, you talk about the team. You had experienced the team growing and all falling apart, and you obviously have different profiles. And I think for a lot of the companies that has engineering knowledge and interesting in engineering, there has to be some leadership or here. How does the group for you two, or is there something outside that drags this forward? Because I'm not sure who is the leader or who takes the leadership, because you always have something that goes first and has this strong belief in where we're heading. So just wonder, your profile is obviously engineering, but somewhere is the leadership. Could you say something about that?
I think that whenever we're assembling a team, what we've found has been most successful, absolutely, is to set the goal. And we've learned recently that it is much more effective. Instead of saying, this goal is realistic, this is what we're going to do, it's actually easier to motivate a team to an impossible goal, because the ambition, the drive is so much greater to do something that nobody else can do, has never been done, is really hard. And that kind of drives a team very focusedly towards one endpoint. And so when we set this goal, we choose this ambitious feat project. We look to assemble people who really believe in that goal, who we can work with, who can work together. You know, we live in a house together in the middle of nowhere. One of the kids was raising snakes at the time. It can really be a stressful environment if people just don't mesh and if everybody is not going in the same direction. And I think we found that that is really important, to set up the vision, to try to create the environment for people to succeed, to give everybody the opportunity to have input, to do what they love as much as possible every day, and to really just guide the project in that direction.
I think, yeah, and from a leadership style, I mean, I guess for me personally, my leadership style has kind of always been, I've got a crazy idea, I'm going, like, who's coming with me? That's
a leader, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, we are trying to understand this, because that type of leadership, it can only last for so long. And I think that I have seen in our teams, it sort of wears off. And you need that next level of being able to understand people and give them things to add to their personal growth, building them up as individuals and as leaders. And so kind of that other side of leadership, or the management of people, I've realized we're not experts in, and that's kind of one of our next challenges, just to start figuring that out, how to continue to inspire people for kind of longer than that initial euphoria stage of, this is amazing, I'll do whatever it takes. You know, that can only last so long.
I think, Todd, there's some HR people sitting in here who will be saying that's exactly why you need HR departments in companies.
Absolutely.
I mean, to sort of ask that question again, would it have made a difference to have a project manager who was not an engineer but was leading the team towards a common goal? That's the question.
I would have loved to have a project manager. I hate project
That's a horrible word, isn't it? But you know.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
I was thinking when the team actually basically broke up, it turned out to be a good thing, you said, because the ones who remained were the unpaid ones and the passionate ones.
Yeah.
But you know, there's still a lot of noise, as we call it. There's a lot of friction going on.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something we could learn, yeah?
Yeah, and that's something also that at the early stages, I mean, at the early stages in recruitment, you know, we hadn't built a name for ourselves. No. We were getting people on the team, just whoever we could. Yeah. We didn't have the ability to really get the best, most passionate people on that team in the first place. I mean, really, a lot of what we learned on that is just the importance of incredible recruitment.
Yeah, seems to be the biggest drive was not that wheel, but the passion in the team, it seems to be, right?
Yeah.
We had a question here. I don't know if there was someone over there who also had a question. A bit difficult to see, but we have a question here.
Hi. You talk a lot about the passion and the drive that's important in doing this. And I'm a bit too far away to see if the rings on your fingers are wedding rings or not. But how do you combine this with having a personal life, having a social life, and having a family, if you do have? Or do you just have incredibly supportive partners at home?
Maybe Todd's wife, Jenny, could answer.
Sitting over there.
Jenny, do you want to come and answer that question?
I actually met my wife now literally the month that we started the Ornithopter project. So she's been with me for like 9 years. And I think that we always say in our projects that it's never just us. There's clearly the team, but there's a much bigger team than you will see flight testing any airplane. Yeah. It's certainly family, people supporting around you, having patience, being willing to, I think, motivate you, externally to pursue an ambitious goal, to not give up. And people really need to facilitate you. Like, as Todd is saying, like extreme fatigue, your body is whipsawing up and down. It takes a lot of people to manage, us as humans, our health, give us the support. And certainly this would be impossible without people who believed in us, believed in our goals and what we were doing, to really help us on this path. I think that's been one of the most important things in enabling this success. Great.
Well, it's been fantastic. I mean, on behalf of all of us, I think I'd like to thank you for your passion, that painful repetition you talked about. That was a great expression. And even thank you for some of your epic failures. Yeah, it's been fantastic listening to you. A really warm round of applause for everyone. Yeah?
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Thanks a lot.
Great job. Well done, Cameron. Thank you. Great.